Ichijo Raku is a high school student whose life is quite the opposite of a normal one due to him being the son of a Yakuza boss. Despite his background, Raku only wishes to live a normal life and become a good civil servant, but in between him and his dream seems to stand all these gangsters under him who even follow Raku on his way to school. Raku's walking to class just like usual when a random blondie comes flying over a fence and delivers a knee right in between his eyes. The girl runs away as she was supposedly in a hurry, and Raku gets in a bad mood due to what had become of his very own face. Luckily for Raku, his mood gets fixed pretty quickly when his classmate and childhood crush, Onodera, patches him. But that statement does not age all that well when that same blondie from earlier walks into Raku's class as the new transfer student, Kirisagi Chitoge. Chitoge immediately spots Raku among the others, and the pair starts arguing until Chitoge gets pissed and smacks Raku right in the face again. The day keeps getting worse for Raku, as after having Chitoge sit right next to him, his beloved locket turns out to be lost as well. Raku starts to panic since that locket was linked to a girl he had made a promise to in his childhood, and he makes an agreement with Chitoge to help him out in the search. A few days pass by, but as the search operation is not really going anywhere, Chitoge gets frustrated and starts arguing with Raku once again. The arguments get pretty heated this time around, and Raku gets so frustrated that he ends up yelling at Chitoge. The guy feels bad for such a weak action, but while he was alongside Onodera later on, Chitoge pulls up again and throws the locket right in Raku's face. Apparently, Chitoge was looking for the locket for quite a while after her fight, and we see how Onodera has a key that is supposedly linked to Raku's locket. Raku's school life had gotten pretty hectic, but this only gets worse when he reaches home, as now, for the sake of stopping the gang wars, Raku's father wanted him to fake a relationship with a fellow gang leader's daughter, and that girl, of course, was none other than Chitoge herself. Chitoge belonged to a rival gang named Beehive, and to calm the gang members down, both of the family leaders announced their young ones as a couple from this day onwards. The pair was totally against even the idea of them dating, but they had to act all lively just to make sure that the gang members wouldn't know the truth. After the announcement is made, and the two have agreed to bear with each other, the pair sits outside where Raku opens up about his locket and the history linked to a girl he met back then. The two seem to have come to an agreement, but the truce doesn't last long, as on the next day they are now forced to go out together. The two did agree to follow along with the plan, but the whole date was just filled with the two of them arguing, as usual. On the date, Chitoge gets cornered by some random thugs who were trying to act cute, but Raku steps in just in time and saves the thugs from getting punched in the face by Chitoge. Chitoge is moved by the gesture, but the situation comes back to normal and their argument continues. While the two were walking through a park, Chitoge leaves Raku to head over to the restroom, and while she was on her way back, she overhears some of her gang members talking about how they still have their doubts about this current arrangement. Back to Raku. Throughout the date, Raku was wishing that he was out with Onodera instead, but he gets stunned when Onodera actually comes across him. Raku is having a general conversation with Onodera when Chitoge runs in and shouts out loud how she is on a date with Raku. Raku had to play along as there was no other way around it other than starting a war, and Onodera also goes back home after denying knowing anything about Raku's locket once again. Raku meets up with Chitoge later on to apologize, and in the meanwhile, we see Onodera reach back home only to regret lying once again to Raku about the necklace. A couple of days later, Raku wakes up in the morning after having a dream about the event involving the girl from his childhood, and he feels quite uneasy since Onodera was now aware of him and Chitoge. Raku heads over to school regardless, and on the way he meets Chitoge, who tells him just how hard her life had gotten recently. The pair makes an agreement to make sure that the relationship remains secretive, but by the time they reach their class, the cat is already out of the bag. The whole class congratulates the two, and they couldn't have even lied due to claws watching them from outside the window. Raku is extremely worried about Onodera being aware of a secret, and he, later on, meets up with her where she tells him all the good things about him. Raku was enjoying the talk quite a lot, but Onodera just happens to drop her key from earlier. Raku grows suspicious, but as Onodera lies about it again, Raku also accepts that there is no chance that that girl could have been Onodera. Raku's school day continues, and a few instances make him notice just how secluded Chitoge is in school. Raku just happens to head over to check up on her in the class, and he finds her working all alone there. Raku offers to help her out with her lack of friends, and things are just fine, until they start arguing again. The two had assumed that they were all alone, so they ended up talking about their false relationship, but to their bad luck, Onodera was just around the corner and heard them loud and clear. A little time passes by, ever since Raku and Chitoge were bound to stick close to each other, and by this time, Chitoge had opened up to more girls and made some friends as well. These new friends had made Chitoge a lot more cheerful, and she even started bragging about small things like getting to visit McDonald's with her girls. While Chitoge was spending time with Raku, Onodera was with her friend, Ruri Miyamoto, looking at the couple while feeling jealous. Onodera's feelings were written on her face, and Ruri read her well enough to offer her some help. Despite Onodera being reluctant, Ruri drags her to Raku, and to bring the two closer, sets a group study session at Raku's place. The friends gather for the session later on, and being together keeps making both Raku and Onodera extremely nervous. After messing up a little while serving tea, the group finally sits down to study, and that is when Ruri plays her cards. She deliberately tells Raku to help Onodera out with a problem she was having, but at the end of the day, even though the two got together, Raku wasn't all that smart to solve those problems. Raku is rather stunned when Chitoge offers to help, and he's almost lost for words when he finds out that this gorilla of a girl is unexpectedly too smart. The study session continues, and Raku's best friend, Shu Maiko, just feels like picking on him. He starts asking some embarrassing questions, and Raku takes him outside to explain the whole fake relationship to him. Shu understands, but before the two head back, he mentions how Onodera actually has a crush on Raku. Such a piece of sudden news makes Raku anxious, and after his gang members see Raku like this, they plot a little event to help their young master out. Raku is told to check the storage room with Chitoge, where the gang members later lock the pair in. Raku was just fine after getting locked inside, but he notices something really strange when somehow the usually bold and loud Chitoge turns out to be scared of the dark. Chitoge clings to Raku, and Raku is all nice about it, until Claus breaks into the storage room while looking for Chitoge, and in the end that makes Onodera run away in embarrassment, concluding the study session. The session didn't go as it was intended to, but in the end, Raku manages to convince Chitoge that there are good things about him too. A couple of days passed by after that study event, and Raku was feeling a bit off due to not interacting properly with Onodera ever since he got caught in the storeroom. Raku was wandering around the school during break time when he happens to find Onodera and Ruri talking about the key she has. Ruri mentions something related to a promise Onodera made back in the day, and that makes Raku think of all sorts of possibilities now. Ruri turns out to be quite smart, as she was already suspicious of both Raku's relationship and him having a crush on Onodera. Later on in the pool area, Raku notices Onodera carrying the same key around, and after he teaches her how to swim, Raku tries to discover the mystery all by himself. The guy is trying to open his locket with that key, but he ends up getting badly beaten up at the end. The actual swimming day arrives, and while everything is seemingly normal, Chitoge gets her legs cramped while swimming, and that causes her to start drowning. Raku jumps in to save her, but he, later on, gets knocked out by her again when she catches him having a pervy talk with Shu. Chitoge was enjoying her exquisite meal the next day at lunch, when the food made both Ruri and Onodera wonder just what Chitoge's family does for a living. Chitoge prefers to keep the truth hidden, and as she has gotten comfortable with the other two, her rants about Raku continue. The girls break the news about how Raku was the one who saved Chitoge yesterday, and now Chitoge starts feeling extremely guilty. The girls convince Chitoge to just go and thank Raku, but every single time she tries to do so, Raku just ends up getting smacked in the face due to her embarrassment. Chitoge did start a nice conversation on the last take, but even this time poor Raku got smacked. Chitoge ends up giving up on the thanks, and she heads back over to the class with Ruri and Onodera, where she explains the truth behind her relationship openly in front of them. Chitoge leaves afterwards since she had something to do, and after she leaves, Ruri encourages Onodera to just go for it and confess since the road ahead of her was clear now. While Raku was wandering around, he happens to drop his locket, and later on it is picked up by Chitoge. Raku comes across Onodera after he receives gratification from Chitoge, even though it was in English. Onodera tries her best and makes the mood all romantic until just before her confession, she backs out after a baseball enters the equation. Despite failing this attempt, Ruri gives Onodera another chance, and later on after school, Chitoge visits Raku to return his locket that she got fixed for him as well. Chitoge prefers to keep the repair a secret, and while she was heading back, she surprisingly also mentioned how she made a promise to a boy in her childhood as well. Sometime later, a new day brings some rumors about how a handsome guy will be transferring into Raku's school, and while Shu was just explaining the details, the guy just happened to enter Raku's class as he was transferring here. The student's name was Tsugumi Seishirou, and he turns out to be Chitoge's old acquaintance. As soon as he sees Chitoge, Tsugumi immediately gets along with her, and he treats Raku nicely as well when Chitoge introduces him as her lover. Everything was seemingly fine, and Raku was rather surprised at Chitoge having a male friend until Chitoge leaves. Tsugumi wishes to have a private word with Raku on the rooftop, and there, he pulls out a revolver on poor Raku. Tsugumi starts ranting about how he wants to be the only one around Chitoge and how a beansprout like Raku doesn't deserve her. The argument kind of escalates, and while Tsugumi was already angry, Raku manages to piss him off even further by mentioning how he's the man for Chitoge. Tsugumi challenges Raku to a duel, and Raku later realizes just what he had done as Chitoge reveals that Tsugumi is a fully trained hitman. The challenge day arrives, and while Chitoge was on Raku's side, Tsugumi literally pulls out guns while chasing out our guy. The two run around the school, and in the end, Raku manages to outplay Tsugumi pretty well. Raku drags Tsugumi into a locker room, and there he comes to know that Tsugumi is actually a woman. The news hits Raku like a truck, but so does Chitoge's fist. Raku is later held accountable outside, and even though Tsugumi wants to do another challenge with Raku in front of him, she immediately accepts defeat after he leaves. Raku had managed to gain Tsugumi's trust, and later on, he also made her embarrassed by telling her that she looks cute in a feminine outfit. Even after she had developed trust in Raku, Tsugumi still kept training under Claws to keep an eye on him. 3 days passed by after her transfer, and by this time, Tsugumi had gotten quite close to the whole class, and had also made a lot of friends. Raku was rather happy about her blending in, but his concern was also there, as Tsugumi just kept staying on his trail. Sometime later, as Raku had to head out for pet food, Tsugumi wishes to follow him, but she is forced to wear female clothes while she is out by Chitoge. Tsugumi had to follow orders, but she still kept getting embarrassed whenever Raku mentioned how she looked cute. The pair was on their way back when not being used to high heels made Tsugumi hurt herself, and despite her being reluctant, Raku carries her on his back. While the two were on their way, they got to know each other better, and this just made Tsugumi catch feelings for Raku even more now. Ever since she went pet food shopping with Raku, Tsugumi started feeling a change in her mood, and even her usual fighter instincts were not as sharp. Such a change made no sense to Tsugumi, so she consulted her friends, and all of them mentioned how she seems to be in love. Tsugumi didn't want to believe that she could fall for Raku, so she keeps denying it, until she has a conversation with Chitoge, who sort of calms her down and she takes the feeling in a better way. Despite all that counseling, Tsugumi still did get embarrassed while hearing the same thing from Raku, but at the end of the day, this conversation got Chitoge to remember her own first love. She heads back home to dig into her old diary from 10 years ago, and while she was going through it, she comes across a key that looks similar to one that might fit Raku's locket. Chitoge diverts her attention over to the key, and she tells Tsugumi to figure out more about this key and her first love tomorrow, until she remembers about tomorrow actually being a special day. Apparently, the school had arranged the trip to the hot springs for the students, and after getting there, Chitoge wondered about how much she would have regretted if she had missed this opportunity. Raku joins her and tells her about the grouping system on this trip, and with some help from Shu, all the main girls end up in Raku's group. The bus was filled with guys, and while everyone was totally jealous of Raku and his luck, Raku himself was having quite a hard time on the journey, as he literally had nowhere to go. The journey finally concludes, and the students are told to straight up go and make lunch for themselves. While cooking, Chitoge's mind keeps wandering around, and she keeps remembering that one guy she met back in the day. Chitoge was taking some fresh water around when she remembered how the guy she knew had a scar on his forehead. This daydreaming leads Chitoge to fall onto Raku, and while Raku notices her key, Chitoge sees the exact same type of scar on Raku's forehead. Chitoge still prefers to ignore it for now, and our group moves into their room after having their fill. As there was still some time for the hot springs to open, Shu suggests the group enjoy their time by planning some old maid cards, and even though Shu gets beaten up for his pervertedness, the group agrees. The game goes pretty easy for Raku, as literally every single one of them other than him had the wrong idea of what a poker face actually is. The game was left up to Raku and Chitoge, but they had to call it off due to their teacher calling them outside, even though Raku was the winner. After the game is done, Raku heads over to the men's bath, but he gets in some serious trouble due to Claws changing the banners. Our guy does manage to escape somehow, and he thanks Chitoge afterwards, who now seems to be catching feelings as well. With things progressing towards the truth behind Raku's locket, our recap for the first half of Nisekoi comes to an end. Thanks for sticking till the end, and let us know in the comments if you guys want a second part of this series. Don't forget to leave us a like and subscribe to our channel for more. As always, we'll see you in the next one. Peace.